Question number 4, Ron Mark.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Internal Affairs and asks, does he have confidence in his department?
The Honourable Peter Dunn.
Yes, I do.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Ron Mark.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister, did the department advise the Minister to strip the citizenship of 27 fraudulent refugees when their fraudulent claims were discovered?
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable Peter Dunn.
I seek your indulgence. The answer I'm about to give, in the interest of giving all the facts, may be slightly longer than usual, and I just seek your indulgence for it.
Thank you for the warning. The Minister can proceed.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Perhaps it would be useful for the House and the member if I just outlined the history of this situation very briefly. We are talking about people who came to New Zealand in the main between 1994 and 2000. They were granted refugee status at that time. That's a matter for the Immigration Service. Subsequently, under, ironically, a New Zealand First Minister of Internal Affairs, most of their citizenships were approved in the late 1990s. They have been citizens since that time. Many have had their own children who are now citizens by virtue of being born in New Zealand. I'm advised that at no time have any of them come to the attention of authorities as being problematic. An investigation by Immigration New Zealand in the early 2000s revealed that some of them may have obtained their residence fraudulently. I emphasise the word may. It was never definitive. A subsequent approach before my time as Minister was made to Internal Affairs by Immigration New Zealand requesting that the passports or the citizenships be withdrawn. Following legal advice and the precedent of other cases, Internal Affairs concluded that that was not only not appropriate from a natural justice point of view, but it was also, given the uncertainty of the circumstances, a very uncertain set of circumstances to be following. And in a number of cases, the persons affected would be rendered stateless by the decision to remove passports. So, Mr Speaker, that is the full background to the case, and I appreciate your indulgence in being able to explain.
Supplementary question?
Supplementary
Question, Ron Mark.
And appreciating that a long explanation, Mr Speaker, I still will ask the questions. So, can the Minister reiterate to the House then, make clear to the House, why did, in his decision not to intervene recently, did he claim that it was because of an operational matter when he had full powers to intervene under Section 17(2) of the Citizenship Act, which would have allowed those people due process through the courts?
The Honourable Peter Dunn.
Mr Speaker, I was actually advised sometime around a year ago of this course of events and the actions that have been taken, and in the circumstances deemed those to be appropriate.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Ron Mark.
So can the Minister explain his department claiming that it acted on humanitarian grounds when a decision to cancel citizenship would have meant that they were able to avail themselves of the processes of the court and to prove that case? Did he not think that that was the appropriate course of action?
The question's been asked. Honourable Peter Dunn.
Mr Speaker, I think I've answered that question in my first supplementary. There was no guarantee, given the circumstances of these cases, that legal actions could have been pursued successfully. And in any case, these people had been resident in New Zealand for a very long period of time, had been operating effectively as model citizens, had their own children who were citizens, and if that noise to my right would be quiet for a moment, the responsibility that I accepted was that in the circumstances, the appropriate actions have been taken from humanitarian and other reasons.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Ron Mark.
Then can the Minister advise the House then what steps he has taken to identify as to whether this is just a tip of an iceberg, bearing in mind that these fraudulent refugees have been accessing welfare, and whether or not that has allowed them to use family reunion processes to bring more refugees in who, on that basis, should not have been brought into the country?
Mr Speaker, all of those questions are
the Honourable Peter Dunn.
All of those questions actually relate to immigration and matters for the Minister of Immigration. What I can advise the member of is that this case has highlighted an issue which Internal Affairs has addressed, and that was that at the time there was no requirement on any of these applicants to indicate that the applications that they made were made in the full information of the other facts. That is... again, sir, the empty vessel to my right proves the validity of the old proverb. The reality is that I have acted. We have tightened up the procedure. This situation would not occur now because people are required to disclose their previous circumstances, and anything that is fraudulent then is immediately drawn to the attention of the police.
Question number 5, Stuart Smith.